Welcome to this meeting of the Police Policy Drafting Committee. And the issue today is traffic and traffic enforcement, vehicle stops, etc. Let me just break down a couple of things. I know we have one observer who is probably listening, and Gene, if we end up with anybody else, if you wanted to, you don't have to listen through your computer. You can actually go to channel 1085 and watch on Cat TV. That's just it's clearly up to you. Either way you work at it. Observers are here only to observe. Participants, we are here to look at this document, particularly the purposes, policy statements, and definition section. The procedures, anything that amounts to a procedure, I doubt if we'll even have time to get to it, but if we do, those are just suggestions for the chief only. I'm just going to ask that we all just briefly introduce ourselves so that we know who we are. I'm not going to ask, since we're on Zoom, I'm not going to ask for us to do some silly question, and Dan will be happy about that.
Both Dans are happy.
Both Dans are happy.
Yes.
I can see that. But the other thing I want to say before we get to introductions is that I will, just because of the way Zoom works, I will probably have us take a quick 5-minute break somewhere around the hour-and-a-half mark. That way we can get up and stretch our legs and change our eye focus and do whatever else we need to do. Okay, is that good for everybody?
Yes.
Good. In which case, for those of you who don't know, who I have not met, my name is Bruce Lee Clark, and I am a retired teacher at the CDC, taught the pre-law program for a number of years. And I'm now a member of the Bennington Select Board. Why don't we, let's see, Lon, why don't we go to you, and then Kara, and then Robert, and then Dan, the two Dans.
Okay. Well, Bruce is also a lawyer.
That's true.
Which he's held back from you, and a doctor of religion.
Yeah, I have a degree in religion. Yes.
So he's learned the rules from a lot of different directions. I'm Lon McClintock. I live in Shaftesbury, and I have a law office in Bennington. And I represented low-income people from 82 to 88, and then worked in a private practice in Bennington from 88 through now and the indefinite future.
Great. Kara?
Hi, I'm Kara. I'm a resident of Bennington. I am the lead for health information management at United Counseling Service.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Robert?
Yeah, my name is Robert Ebert. I'm a retired firefighter. My wife and I moved to Bennington almost 12 years ago. And I'm just, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this exercise.
Great. Whichever Dan wants to go first.
I guess I'll go. For those of you who don't know me, I think it's Carrie, you're maybe the only one. My name is Dan Monks, and I am the assistant town manager for Bennington, and I've been working for the town for about 22 plus years.
I see you walking everywhere.
Yes,
At the face.
I'm a committed walker. Yes, so
Good for you.
I do have a license, but I choose not to drive very often. So Dan, you're up next.
Yep. Dan Ferrara, Bennington Police. I have been on the police department now for over 4 years, here to help you guys with understanding what it is we do and clarify any questions that you guys may have during this process.
And both Dan and Dan are, with me, are the sort of three permanent members. So we've been through this. This is our, I think, fifth meeting of this sort, and fifth different, or more than 5 different policies. There, and then the rest of the cast sort of changes as we go along. Just a couple of things about the process that we're going to go through, and the process that this ends up happening with is that I'm going to first ask you. Hopefully, you've had a chance to look at this is one of those times where we're using a current set of policies from the Bennington PD, and that hasn't always been the case. We are, once we're done with it, we're going to work on language. We can add things, particularly to policy. It will then go, once we're done today, if we're done today, and I'm hoping that we will be, to our satisfaction, if we're done today, it'll go back to Dan Monks, and then to me, and just to make sure that we've got all of the corrections changes that we thought we were going to have. And then it will, I will send it back out to you briefly for your quick look to see. It'll be like a 48-hour turnaround. Look at it, see if it meets you with what you thought we did, and then send it back. Let me know that it is or isn't, and how it might be better. And then it will go to our town attorney and the chief and the state's attorney for their review. And then it will go to the select board. And once it goes to the select board, it'll be there for, I'll let you know, but it'll be there for 2 meetings, at least, minimally. An introduction one meeting, and then an action the following meeting, assuming that all goes well. And at that point, then our work will be up on the police website. The chief will be at the same time working on procedures that match or that meet the requirements of the policy. So then that will be up on the website as well, the police department's website. So that's the process as we have put it together. And we are about ready to see the first set of policies addressed to the select board this coming meeting. So what I'd like us to do is, if you don't mind, go through. I would like you to sort of give me some notions about things that caught your eye as you were reading through this traffic enforcement. It's really a set of 5 different, as I read it, 5 different policies, all dealing with some form of stopping and traffic enforcement, stopping of vehicles and traffic enforcement. So tell me what you think about where are the places we need to be looking.
Could I ask you a question, Bruce?
Sure, you can.
Okay. I had imagined when the process started that I would not see a highly developed policy for roadside stops. I don't know why I assumed that. I just did.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you have up, I assumed, was a policy that's been adopted by the police department and amended twice. And then when I went through the materials, the model policy was far less detailed and refined than the Bennington Police Department policy. Have I screwed up someplace, or is that?
No, and one, you have not. The reason that, I mean, lots of different ways we can go on this, and I've not tried to prejudge. The reason I made the decision initially to at least introduce you to the current policy is that yes, it is very specific. Some of it is because it's very specific to Vermont and to what Bennington needs to do with regard to Vermont. But with regard to Vermont law and you know how that how Vermont law on traffic stop gets developed, it's piece by piece by piece. So I made the initial decision, although gave you the model policy from IACP, that the current policy could be a starting place. It doesn't have to be the starting place.
No, I'm not suggesting anything like that. I just want to make sure that, because I was pretty impressed with the police department's existing policy.
Yep.
I thought it missed a couple of detailed items from the model policy. One was, standing on the roadside, not in front or behind or between vehicles, and a couple of minor things that really don't get at the reason we're looking at these policies.
Right.
I thought the biggest contrast between this and the state police policy was their data collection on warnings, because it seemed to me that if the issue is to have more uniform, not like police uniform, but uniformity in treatment of the citizenry, then the biggest area where there can be discriminatory behavior is where there's discretion involved between citation versus warning and citation for civil versus criminal. And I understand some citations cannot be criminal, but it seemed that the state police were collecting data on all stops through a warning form, so that a computer theoretically could crunch numbers and say, well, 20% of our stops are African Americans, and all 20% get cited. And of the 80% of the whites who are stopped, only 65% of them get cited and 35% get warnings.
Mm-hmm.
That's I made that hypothetical up just to illustrate the point that it's, to me, if we want to bring some accountability and uniformity to policing, then the question would be, should the policy include some mandatory things, like every stop has to end up with some piece of paper that identifies, the groups that cannot be subject to discriminatory behavior. And the second question is, even if you want to do that, do you have the capacity to use the data, either for individual enforcement officers, which seems to me what you'd want to be able to do, but at least as the department as a whole. So anyway,
that's precisely the kind of comment that I would be hoping that your work would elicit at this point. So, what we're looking at is, before we start looking at an actual document, what is it that we feel we need to make sure is included? And I would think one of the ways to be able to document the interests that are expressed in certain areas of the policy, that they would enforce all traffic laws without prejudice throughout the community, is in fact to have that kind of documentation, which I did not see in the current policy. It may be in their practice, that's a different matter. And we can ask Dan about that if we want.
Yeah,
Dan,
that already isn't.
It currently is not.
It is in place.
It is in
states
place.
yes, it states in the policy here that the enforcing traffic law violations will result in one of the following actions, being either and then it lists the warnings or written warnings or VCVC and so on. And on all of those, the what we call the race data sheet is filled out.
But when you say the race data sheet, what does it track?
Well, it will track all of the personal information for the operator that's being issued the paperwork. So name, address, sex, all of that, and then their perceived race, as well as if there was a search conducted, an arrest made, or what the outcome of the stop was in general, whether it be a warning, a ticket, an arrest, or so on. All of that is documented, and then it gets put into the system by our records clerk. For then the state compiles the data from all of the traffic stops, or at least the information is there for them to do so. Can compile the information from all of the stops made throughout the entire state to come up with the statistics that you were alluding to.
I have a question.
Sure.
You indicated that the data is there for the taking. What is done with the data? And is any data used in policy development by the Bennington Police Department?
So I'm not in charge of developing policies or anything like that, so I can't speak on that. But just as I explained, the data is entered into the system to be pulled by employees of the state, whoever's in charge of compiling all of the data. I believe it's done by someone up in Burlington or something, or Montpelier. All the data is compiled, and I'm sure reports get made and sent out to whoever, but I don't know what's done from that afterwards.
Era,
Dan Monks, do you get the data?
No, I don't. I don't know. Stuart may, and maybe the chief may, but I don't review police data.
No. And just, Kara, just so you understand, and we all understand, up until this process, nobody but the chief had been making policy. There was no other group. So if the chief used that, and could very well use data from race data sheets, although I'm still interested in more what's on that race data sheet, Daniel. So if you can be thinking about that. But
so I have this stuff right here.
Perfect. That's why you're there. It would seem to me that that's if we want that kind of feedback, that's another reason to ask for data to come back to the chief. And I can imagine it eventually being shared with a civilian oversight committee that would be developing policy, but that currently is not in existence.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think Kara's point, though, if it was just stretched out a little bit, if instead of making policy, it would be an effective feedback tool in terms of supervision of individual officers as well as supervision of the department as a whole. So if somebody inside and outside the department was routinely getting the information, like the chief or an assistant chief is responsible for going over it, plus somebody outside the department, sort of, if you will, the external conscience of the department saying, this is looking like a pattern or an issue, and starting the conversation, usually that can be fairly remedial rather than waiting for a complaint to be triggered. And then people say, oh, there's been a pattern here for quite some time.
Right.
The other thing is this data public information? That a public information request can be effective in obtaining it.
So Lon, I can't answer that question, but I can tell you that I'm sure that the individual identifying characteristics of people probably not public, but the cumulative data probably is. In fact, I'm almost positive it is, but we can find that answer. We can find that information out for you, but I don't, and unless Officer Ferrara knows, I don't think that we know how that data is handled. It
Yeah,
may
I wouldn't imagine.
very well
that-
be delivered to the chief on a regular basis. He's just not here to tell us that.
Right, I get that. I'm just raising the question as something for follow-up.
Yeah,
But-
no, I do know that when they did go to this enhanced database, that the promise was of the new system that there would be more real time and more reliable data to share with anybody who wanted it. I just don't know how effective that has been, but we can certainly find out.
Yeah, I think the other aspect is whether it's by officer.
That was one of my questions. And Dan Ferrara, I'm I'm assuming that when the race data sheet, and I shouldn't assume, let me ask, when the race data sheet is filled out, do you put your officer's number on that?
Yes, so I'll go over this now. So I have a VCVC here, which is a traffic ticket, and a written warning here. And these are, other than a criminal citation, these are the two documents that would be issued during a traffic stop. Well, one or the other. On each one of them, I'll go over the warning because it's smaller and easier to hold up. The personal information of the operator is on top. So you have the name, address, their date of birth, so you can get their age, male or female, vehicle information, the violation that was observed with a description of the offense. So it'd be speeding X amount in a speed zone. Then it goes into the race of the operator, the reason for the contact, whether it was a moving violation, an externally generated stop, an investigatory stop, suspicion of DUI or vehicle equipment. If there was a search and the type of search that was conducted, what the outcome of the stop was. So warning, ticket, arrest on a warrant, or no action. And any evidence that was located. If there were to be a search, you would mark down that. And then at the bottom here, you have the officer has to sign it. The officer prints their name and the officer puts their badge number there. And then the same thing on the ticket. All the same information is gathered, with the exception of adding the points and fine to it. And on the back of the yellow copy is what gets filled out for the race data. And again, it's the same race, reason for contact, searches, and what the outcome of the stop was.
Bruce, you're muted.
There we go.
Sorry. So I think we certainly can get information back to each of us about how that gets back to or doesn't get back to what happens to that data once it's sent. But as a committee, we can also, in policy, make it so that whatever data is collected is brought back to the chief or to the chief and to somebody on the town so that the chief and somebody else knows. My first inclination is to do it with the chief. That, we can put that in policy just as easily now as anything else. Because I do think one of the things that can help proactively in terms of creating procedures, it can be a policy that the department will create procedures so that the data from that are collected at traffic stops, whether they be violations or warnings, be compiled by and brought back so that the chief is aware of the data. I think that certainly is something. I did not see that specifically in any of the policies, and that was one of the points that I was hoping we would address today.
It's in the Vermont State Police policy. It's a mandatory requirement that if a warning is given, they have to complete the sheet.
Right.
If we're not included in this general order that the chief adopted, could be seen as more procedural or discretionary.
Right. But we're now creating, instead of, this is the chief's general order. You're absolutely right. But what we're actually doing is using, or not using something to create policy that the town will adopt for the police department.
Okay, so I would just reframe what I said, which is I'm comfortable with what the chief has as a foundation, and adding to that the section from the Vermont State Police policy that requires officers to complete the warning form as Dan Ferrara has described, as a requirement as opposed to being discretionary.
Right.
Does it?
That already is in place, though.
Lon, I don't think it is discretionary if you read the procedures. It says all data will be entered and completed on the face of the written warning. It has to be done under the existing policy.
Yeah. Well, under the, and Dan, can you just say for everybody's sake where you were just reading? Because
I'm sorry, page 2 of 27 on the bottom, or under at the last portion of warnings. Also, if you look at the type up above,
at line 46.
at
Can
line
you
46,
either get
yes.
rid of this thing so I can pull up mine, or either scroll us down there?
Michelle, can you scroll us?
Michelle,
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
So Michelle Farrar is our behind the scenes scribe. Just so everyone knows.
Yes.
So I have a question, another question. Officer Ferreira, can you just read the list of data that's captured on those forms again?
Yep.
Please.
Get it out of the drawer again. So we have the personal information from the operator, name, date of birth, address, everything like that. Date of birth is gathered so that we can get the age. So we have age, we have sex, we have race of the operator, the reason for the contact or stop, what the stop, what the violation was, the actual statute that was violated, and then any search information, if we search the vehicle or search the person, anything that was located as a result of that search, and then what the most serious outcome of the stop was, whether that be from just a warning all the way up to an arrest of some sort.
Is it documented anywhere? Those are very discrete data points, and I'm not entirely sure how they would be used to drive a policy. Is it documented anywhere the type of interaction between the resident and the police officer, meaning was it positive or negative? Was there an approach used by the officer to elicit the type of reaction from the resident?
No, there's not anything in writing, and I don't know that that would be very easy to keep track of, because that would be kind of a opinion based. I could go out and stop every car and say I had I said hi to them, that was positive, or they told me to go pound sand and that was negative, and so it's very, I think personally that would be hard to come up with to actually collect data from, because it's very opinion based. I could say me and another officer that would be sitting next to me could watch what happened on a stop through my body camera or cruiser camera and have two different opinions on how that came out. So
I was just gonna say that
it is very opinion based, but it's also very important. It could be very important data that could drive police practices.
I don't think subjective data can be used to drive practices. You have to somehow make it objective.
So you don't think it could be used proactively in supervision?
No, because you can't prove it one way or the other.
So if one officer has indicates that every interaction was a positive one, you don't think that would be a red flag?
Well, Kara, remember, and I'm not going to agree or disagree with either of you, because I actually think there's a way that kind of information can be gained without it being written down by the officer. And that is, there is a body camera and a dash camera running, and it should be running on each of these interactions. And should, you know, I don't know whether they do it, and I don't know how long they hold those camera footage, but I know it's a chunk of time. That could actually be utilized in a review of a, just a general practice. So, for example, the chief could, it seems to me, utilize an officer's body camera and dash cam on a typical traffic stop in order to go over how, the steps, or the lieutenant could do that in terms of, this is what you're going to do when you do a traffic stop. And this is an example of a good one, or this is an example of one that didn't go so well. That information is there. And that it may not be the same as self-reporting of what it is, but it's, I think, it's certainly less subjective. And remembering that we also have, we're dealing with officers who have rights at a particular level. We need to act within those confines. I don't know if this is helping or not. Kara, so please.
I think the difference is what Kara suggested is of a type of information that's based on self perception that's reduced to a written description. Right. A written description may not have some of the detail or nuance that a supervisor would want in order to enforce. For example, I was involved in supervising a judge, and I read the transcript, but you couldn't tell if he was yelling at the guy or if he was talking in a very businesslike tone or whatever. Nobody used any unacceptable language. So only by actually listening to the recorded hearing could you tell if somebody was going over the line, because they were cutting somebody off and getting so loud that they were becoming intimidating, which is unbecoming of a judge. Kara, can I go back? Or I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
That's right. That's kind of where I was going. As a supervisor, I expect my staff to provide a self-evaluation every so often, and then I provide one. And then I do a comparison of the two, and we find out where the disconnect is. And I'm basing this on data being emails, conversations, interactions, quality of work. That's all data. Mm-hmm. Does that happen in the police department? And are the body cam videos reviewed on a regular basis?
So as part of, we do have as an employee, we do have an annual review to go over how we're doing and things we need to work on, things we're doing good, everything like that. Just about anywhere that I know of that has employees and supervisors does that to some extent. So, and then as you can imagine, then you'll have their self-evaluation, and then you'll have your evaluation of a certain employee. And there's always a scale, a tipping scale. They're, for the most part, the employee will say they're doing great. I don't know of anything I'm doing wrong. And a supervisor will say, you are doing great, but here's a bunch of stuff that you're doing wrong. So there's always going to be that, those talking points. As far as how we do our things, it's kind of similar. We will go over, for the most part, it's statistic based. So how many traffic stops, how many arrests, how many tickets, how many actual numbers that we produce, that can be tracked on with numbers, get talked about, and then just our general working with other, like all the basic stuff that is involved in as being an employee as well. As far as body cameras and everything like that, I believe, now I'm not a supervisor myself, but I believe that supervisors, as part of that review, do little spot checks every once in a while on our body cams, just to see. They'll just pick out a couple random body cameras that we do have. They'll go over that interaction and see just randomly how we handled a situation, whether we're doing great, making good rapport with people, having, as you would say, a good interaction, or maybe we're on the other end of it. So I know they do spot checks, but as far as going over every single traffic stop and every single incident, that would be completely overwhelming just after one day.
Yeah,
we'll
I don't agree with that.
yeah. So there are, to answer your question, there are spot checks that are done as part of our review process. Whether it's only traffic stops or it's not specified the type of incident that gets reviewed. It's literally just, they'll go through our list of body cameras and watch something and see how it went.
Could I go back to a
Sure.
comment Dan had made about warnings on the bottom of page 2?
Yes.
You know, I don't work in the department, but if I were reading this thing cold, which I am, it says a written warning may be issued. That's permissive language, not mandatory language. Whereas in the state police policy, roadside stop data shall be documented on the written warning form. So I'm not meaning to split hairs, but I sort of am, because I think the question is whether or not somebody can do a roadside stop and not document it.
So if you go to the paragraph right above that,
Yeah.
enforcing traffic law violations will result in one of the following actions by the officer. And then it lists all of the results, being the warning, the written warning for equipment repair, a VCVC, all of that.
But
so it's
Seems pretty clear to
saying
me,
that
Lon.
it will happen.
right,
Yeah.
but there's another category that's not accounted for,
Which is,
which is you make the stop and it turns out you don't have a basis for giving a warning.
That's not ever going to happen.
they have to document it, Lon. It's what it says in the policy, and it's what they do.
If they issue a warning.
But they have to at least issue a warning. They can't
Why?
paperless stop.
Yeah. Every single stop that we make is documented on paper of some sort or another, whether it's the warning, the ticket, or an equipment repair order, anything. Anytime that a vehicle is stopped, we have to document it on paper.
Right, but let's say you make a stop because you're allowed to do investigatory stops, and you conclude that you can't issue a warning.
There's still a warning. There's still a warning issued, and then, like I said, at the bottom of the warning, when it says reason for contact for that stop, there's the moving violation, externally generated stop, an investigatory stop, a suspicion of DUI, or vehicle equipment. So that paper gets filled out minimum anytime that there's a stop made.
I say, Bruce.
Yes, Robert.
I I thought we were beginning with everyone giving a brief overview of what they thought about the policy. Have we abandoned that, or
We
we
have
now
not,
into the
we have
nuts and-
not, nope, we haven't abandoned that. I'm just trying to get clarity on,
Okay.
we're not going to make any decisions right now. I have some
Oh.
ideas, but we're not making any decisions right now. I
Okay.
think I was about to actually suggest, what I have down as issues for us at the moment are the issue of data.
Well, wait, Bruce.
Wait, Robert, I'm going to come to you right after I make my current list
Oh,
so that I can
okay.
get to you, because I haven't heard from you yet. That was
Well, we kind of seemed like we got off the path there. So-
I don't think we're off a path, but be that as it may, this is sort of a wandering trip for the first 45 minutes to an hour. As
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay. As the Dans will attest. So there is the issue about data collection, and I do think at some level we could address up above the types of enforcement action question, because those are against. I thought of those as procedures, but I actually think we could address the notion. That's fine. Don't go any further. Michelle, back on that same page. Yep, right there. Stay right where you are. This is going to be harder for Michelle because she's not going to know. But at any rate, that issue, the issue of the use of data, that is not clearly addressed. The use of language similar to what's in the Vermont State Police that would cover make it clear that in every, Dan, even though I know that when you stop, you're going to fill out a form, and that's practice. And to some degree, it's in the document, in the general order. A case could be made that it is not as clear as it could be. That's all I'm saying. And remembering that the policy is, while it is primarily for the police, it is also so the public knows what they should be expecting from you. That's the other side of this. And that's what we'll both be looking at. So that data information, I think, is critical because it deals with how stops are assessed over the long haul. Robert, I'm coming to you now.
Oh my goodness.
Do you have points where you think the general order of 27 pages gave you pause?
Yes. Okay. So according to the report by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, overwhelmingly, people who have contact with the Bennington Police Department do so as a result of traffic stops. Further on in the report, according to a survey, fully 50% of the respondents have a negative view of the police and have a negative view of their interactions with the police. In several places in this policy, there is language about how the police will treat everyone with dignity and respect, how they will treat people equally, regardless of race or religion or socioeconomic status, how they will strive to make the encounter a positive one that will build relationships with the community. So fully 50% of the people interacting with our police department have a negative view of that interaction. My question, and I think the job before us with this policy, rather than tinkering with all the nuts and the bolts, is trying to figure out where this disconnect is, why this policy is not being adhered to on the street, why it's not being enforced from the chief's office on down. I think instead of dwelling so much on how do we how do we keep our eye on the police officer, whether it's through data collection or body cameras or any of that? Try to figure out what the problem is here. Why the dictates of this policy, as far as interacting with the public goes, why that is not being adhered to. That is the problem. It might be the culture of the department. It might be leadership. It might be what they hire police officers based on. I don't know. But to me, that is the core problem with this policy, especially given the backdrop against which we are doing all of this. That seems to me the most important job we have. So that is my brief overview of what I got from you.
Here's my dilemma, Robert, and I'll let anybody else respond who wishes to. We could try something like you're suggesting, but that's not the charge of this committee. And part of that, it may be, I'll give you my hope. And this is that the disconnect, which may very well be there, though I suspect that some of my own interactions, not with so much with the Bennington PD, but earlier on in my career with other police officers who were stopping me for traffic violations, was because I was stopped for a traffic violation, and that in and of itself left a negative taste in my mouth. But be that as it may, I think one of the things we can do, remembering that that accountability for a policy is only helped if everybody involved in the encounter happens to know or can find out what the heck the policy is. So when Officer Dan stops me next time, he hasn't stopped me yet, but you never know. When he stops me and he comes up to me and without introducing himself and and starts by asking the question, do you know why I stopped you? I'm going to be in a much different position after we pass a policy than before, because I'm at least going to be able to say to Officer Ferrara, excuse me, but could you just please start back at the front end of this and tell me who you are and tell me why you stopped me? Because that's the process that I'm hoping we're going to see. That's actually the process that's implied in this general order, though it isn't, in my experience, always followed. So,
Bruce?
Yes.
It is in the policy.
It is in the document, but it's not in the policy sections of the document.
It is. Officer conduct toward traffic violators.
Where are you reading? Just so that I know where you're
Roman
reading.
5, large A, number 3. Greet the violator with his or her title, name, and department.
Right. But
And at some point in this introduction, the officer shall state the reason as to why he or she is stopping the violator.
I agree. The problem is that's not the policy part of this document. The policy sections, I know this one is particularly, I find particularly less clear.
I don't distinguish between calling one thing a policy and another procedure, because a policy tells you how to perform your job, which is a procedure. So I equate the two, because a violation of a written procedure is the same as violating a policy.
That would be true. The difference is in our situation, and this is the tack that we have taken each time, and that is that the general overall policy statements, the purpose statements, and the statements that are highlighted in yellow, and I understand that it's easy not to, make this distinction, and I think in this particular general order, it's even more difficult to make this distinction. I would admit that. But in general, the select board has only taken on itself not to deal with procedures. The chief will have to write a new set of procedures that comport with the policy statements that the select board is going to make. And that's what we're being asked to draft. If that's not a possible thing for us, I need to know that.
Well, I mean, I think this general order should be treated as a policy from start to finish. It will have general guidelines in the introduction to set the tone, and then it's going to have very specific requirements. And when it says 5A3, greet the
Right.
violator with his or her title, I don't assume that's discretionary. It's a flat statement. These are things that the officer is required to do. Now,
Right.
to Bob's point, that's never been my experience with a police officer. When we recently asked an officer to do a well check, which he did very well, and it was a great interaction. The officer started the conversation by saying, "Are you so-and-so who asked for a well check?" And then he went about his business. There wasn't the typical greeting two civilians might give each other. "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I was asked to respond to this call. Or, can you, what's going on?" It wasn't like that. It was more like, "I'm in a uniform. You know why I'm here. Let's get down to business."
So going back to my question, how is this monitored and documented and this data used proactively? It may be in the policy, but are officers documenting this? Whether it's objective or subjective, it has to be documented somehow. We're certainly not going to ask residents to do that documentation, correct? It would have to be documented by the officer.
So when you say this, what is the referent to the this?
The part that Lon referenced before.
That wasn't a traffic stop, was it, Lon?
And supporting what Robert said, how do you reconcile the discrepancy between the report and the policy statements that we see here? There's no data. How do we monitor that?
Well,
Yeah, that's always a tough question, isn't it, Dan? Because you were saying
Yeah.
how it's not actionable when somebody says they had a nasty interaction. I mean, what do you do with that? Do you know what I mean? So if the perception is that the officers are rude and all that, that's not something that's easily dealt with, or the respect the community has for its officers. So I appreciate Kara's comment. How do we change this from just stuff into something that's more usable for the department in a way that the office, builds the officer's relationship with the community and the community's confidence in the officers and all that? How do we get to that next step?
The first step is to craft policies that require, respectful interactions, which I think they do. And I kept my mouth shut for a little bit, but I'm going to push back a little bit with Robert's comments because I think they're misguided and not based in the IACP report. The IACP report was very clear that in every traffic stop, there is likely to be negative feelings, and that you're not going to have, if you do a survey, no one's going to say, "Oh, it's so great that I got stopped by a police officer for a traffic violation." So I think it's completely unfair to say that there were negative responses about traffic stops. Does that mean that we can't improve that relationship and make it a better, more positive experience? Yes, but it's never going to be a completely positive experience. And it's our job, I think, as policy writers to draft policies that will respect both the officer's safety as well as trying to make it as comfortable and positive as possible for the violator or citizen that was stopped. So, I think that's what we're trying to do. I think what we're getting off base, Bruce, if I might say, talking about, how police officers should be reviewed, how police officers should be hired, how police officers should be trained. We've got a policy to build, and I think we got to focus on that, and not in the other stuff, although important, is not our job today.
Well, okay, I'm just going to push back a tiny bit, Dan, because I think the question is, what kinds of provisions in the policy can result in actionable information that can be used to guide police conduct?
And we should be thinking of that.
And so when we were talking about, the interaction being positive or negative, I think some of the things in that section 5A talk about how you subjectively treat an interaction between a police officer and a member of the public. I think it assumes that it's a fairly minor stop and not, pulling over a known felon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then is it simply to write that and just say, well, they'll have to figure out how to implement that? Or is there something about the language in the policy that might be helpful?
That's, Lon, let me say that's precisely where the introductory language of policy can make a big difference. I will make a distinction between procedure and policy. And the reason I will do that is because I have to, given the rules of the road that the select board have created for us, and also that distinction between administrative regulations, which are the things like officer conduct toward traffic violators, although I'd like it to be a different language than that. That language is in fact administrative procedures, and I agree that they have to be utilized, they have to be measurable, and they have to comport with the broader language. Our job, it seems to me, is to craft purpose language and general overarching policy language, which currently is not in there, in my view, that will in fact require the use of the data that is being collected and making sure that the data is being utilized or being collected. The use of, for example, one of the things, in the warning that's not there currently is a distinguish, I mean, you can get it, but it's really hard. Is this person, the statement was made to the IACP, for example, that we have a number of traffic violations, primarily because we have a lot of visitors traveling through the state, through Bennington. I probably would agree with that on a subjective basis. I would also agree that it's possible, given that we have their address, that we could come up with, but a computer cannot do that, whether they are local or whether they are transient traveling through. That's a huge difference in terms of the way in which numbers get crunched, as, for example, just in terms of the number of traffic stops. So all that being the case, it seems to me that the language we use at the beginning of each section and at the beginning of this, what I'm going to call now a policy on traffic stops or vehicle stops, I'm more interested in calling it something like that, that the language we use in that, including that each stop will have some paper documentation or some documentation of that, even though it's included under procedures, that each one of these things you'll have to fill out. I would like a generalized statement. I would also like a generalized statement that the chief will receive on a regular periodic basis, the data back by officer on who they're stopping and why, and what's the result. I think that information ought to be in a general statement of policy that covers all 27 pages. I really do.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I think for purposes of today, I'm just not going to be able to distinguish between policy and procedure because I'm not tuned into it that well, and you'll have to figure that piece out.
And
Hey, Lon,
Mhm.
go ahead.
a policy, I just looked it up. A policy is a set of parameters for decision-making, but leaves room for flexibility. They show the why behind the action. And a procedure, on the other hand, explains the how. It's a step-by-step instruction.
Right.
Is that helpful?
Mhm.
Hey, Bruce,
Yes, Robert.
I do, I don't know if pushback is the right phrase to use, but kind of some of what Dan said, I think it's very short-sighted to blame negative responses on a survey to the general feeling that nobody likes to be pulled over. I don't think that's a very accurate way to look at this. And language in the IACP report talks over and over again about people feeling threatened by police, people feeling that there are two socioeconomic tiers in this town, and one gets treated well and one gets treated poorly. Just to say that, well, nobody likes to get pulled over, again, I think is very short-sighted. And when I made my original comments, I'm reading straight out of the IACP report. So to say my comments are not based on that, again, I think is erroneous. But I just want to state one more time, there is language all through this policy that tells officers how to treat people with dignity and respect. The IACP report said overwhelmingly, most people interact with the police through traffic stops. So I think you can extrapolate that most of these people are dealing with the police through police stops. 50% of them have negative views of the police based on their interactions. And I still think the core problem here is to figure out the disconnect between what the policy requires and what's happening on the street. That's where the problem is.
So Robert, that's the purpose of policy language that requires making that connection and to making it more transparent.
Okay.
And that's that, we're not going to try to address the whole IACP report in a single policy. We're actually taking on probably a dozen to 24 different policies in each case, trying to address the issues that were raised in the IACP report. In the case that I will still say that and we had the same issue that came up 2 weeks ago, and then upon further reflection, members of the committee wanted to know, how can we make sure that the policy is followed? How can we make sure that it's implemented? How can we make sure that that the folks where the rubber hits the road follow the policy? And the answer to that is in part, so it's a multi-part system. One of the differences between when the IACP report is written and from this point forward is that the policies will be public. Okay? That means that the public can hold police officers through a complaint and compliment process. That process is one of the ways in which officers can be held accountable to a policy. Secondly, through the select board, because these are now going to be select board adopted policies, not just police department policies. Thirdly, the chief and lieutenant, the supervisory structure within the department itself can hold people responsible. So I mean, I think those three means, I mean, not to mention, I would say the town administrative structure can do the same. So all that being the case, I know there's background noise. I don't know where that's coming from.
With,
But-
with that in mind, Bruce, a couple of things. Then I think the policy should reflect that the data is not only reported to the chief, but somebody outside the department, both department-wide and officer-specific. And then the third one that I'd like to hear from the Dans on is whether or not the citizen is entitled to that information if they file a complaint against a particular officer. As a matter of policy, should that be information that's that a citizen can have if they feel like they've been the subject of profiling or discriminatory behavior or decision making? I think that's a really loaded one, but I think it's it gives the citizen an offensive weapon if they feel they've been treated badly based on what have you. So I think that needs some thought and discussion because
Yep. I agree. I think that's helpful. And I do think it's a hard issue. And it's an issue that probably interacts with a number of other competing values that we need to sort of flesh out. And it may be one that we, at the end of the day, need to do more research on and come back with and communicate with all of you in a way that you agree to do, that may result. I don't know the answer to that, but I want us to know that that's an option. So it's a good point. I think it's one that's well worth thinking through and thinking about how a policy might, to what extent is the data available? And I think that's a critical issue, and the state probably has something to say about that, as well as us. So I think that's a helpful point. Are there other general reflections about the extent of these 27 pages, much of which by the way, Lon, if you make a suggestion about a particular section, which I still think is procedure, I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to make sure that it's recorded, and it will at least go into, at the very least, into the chief. And the chief and I have had these conversations over and over again.
that's fine. I'm not going to hold back.
No, I think
And you
that's
guys
fine.
can figure out
Yeah,
where you guys figure out where it belongs.
Right.
I'm just not going to make that distinction. And when I'm off base, you guys can.
it's okay, Lon. We're fine.
The other section that bugged me
Yeah.
was the section about teenagers, young adults. There's a section that talks about how people are going to be treated.
Right.
Diplomats, you can't take them in unless it's this, that, or
Right.
the other thing and stuff. And it seemed to me the policy said kids are going to be treated like everybody else. And I understand the sentiment may have been they're not entitled to any special breaks just because they're hormonally stupid. That they need to obey the law just like everybody else.
Right.
I just think that's an area that could have been a little more nuanced, because it talked about, I think, the arresting them if you have this, that, and the other thing, which I didn't see in any of the other sections. So there was some reason that was originally put in that section when dealing with
Yes, and I think it's, I was just looking for it while you were talking.
Yeah, I can't find it right now, but I think that's a topic in and of itself at some point within the department. That it seems to me that some of the conflict that's going to come up, that I can vision coming up, is with younger people who are less tolerant, more stupidly self-confident, that feel like they can say anything to anybody.
Right.
I think that's an area where the policy should be more developed, because those people are not necessarily going to have mellowed with experience. And so I would think maybe there's some strategy that experienced officers have a handle on that would be worth incorporating in policies or procedures.
Right.
So because I'm sorry I'm dragging on, but I think some of the violent confrontations we're hearing about nationally are happening between younger people and police officers. So
Yes.
Are you referring to other considerations 2B on page 4?
Give us just
Juveniles
four.
would be,
Tara, if you can just give us page and line numbers, that's the handiest way to do that.
page 4, line 31, starting with line.
On juveniles.
Is that the section that you're referring to, Lon?
yeah, let me.
Can you move to that, Michelle?
I actually had a question about that.
I did too, so that was one that I had marked.
It's on page 5 on my copy of it, page 5 of 29.
Oh, you have, okay. Is it 2B? Roman numeral 2B, juveniles?
Yes.
Okay, so that's at least the same section. Juveniles will be treated in the same manner as adult offenders. If the juvenile is to be physically arrested, then the officer will follow procedures set forth by Vermont law.
I mean, that's true for every category,
Well, yeah, that would be true.
even people not in the special category.
Right.
So there was some reason, somebody was thinking of something. Either officers were treating them differently, which maybe was putting officers at risk, or was sending the wrong message, or I don't know what, but there was some thinking behind that that I wish I understood.
Yeah, I for the life of me, I just had a big question mark by it, trying to figure out.
But I don't know that treating them the same as adult offenders really addresses a larger issue.
No. Were they being treated differently than adult offenders? So, Officer Ferrara, can you do you recall any conversations you've had with anybody regarding the treatment of juvenile offenders or juveniles that may be involved in a traffic stop?
No, but what this is referring to, from my point of view, is if a juvenile is stopped, there's not going to be any special treatment. Like, we don't need to call parents and have them come to scene or anything like that. That's why it's saying they'll be treated the same manner as any adult offender. As for the arrest portion, that is most likely in place due to a juvenile arrest is a completely different avenue than a normal adult arrest.
Right.
Because then we have to, there's only certain times where we can take a juvenile physically into custody. Then we have to get parents involved and everything like that. That's why that is most likely put into wording, is just because juveniles in some areas of the law are under their own classification. but in other areas of the law, such as these traffic violations, they are not lumped into their own category. They are with everybody else.
Right. But Dan, all I can say is from an outsider's point of view, while I knew that there was that distinction, I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out why we were saying that, other than,
And I can see from an outsider's point of view where you don't understand law or don't know the laws.
No,
of
I
juveniles.
know the law. That's
no,
not
I
my
know
problem. Sorry. Go ahead, Dan, officer. Sorry.
You were saying from an outsider's point of view where a common citizen might not know, arresting a juvenile involves all of this or something like that. That is why it's who is on scene and handling the situation knows that that's the law, or that's the policy that they have to follow. Is when they arrest a juvenile, it's the same as arresting a juvenile, or when it's a traffic. It's this. I mean, policies are here, number one, for the officers to know what they need to do while they're on the job. Number two would be so that other people understand what we have to do. But the main point of a policy is so that the officer knows the boundaries and the scope that they have to work in.
Sure.
So the language is going to be different and everything like that. But like I said, it's the most important thing is so that we know what we have to do when we are handling an incident.
I would agree with that. I guess I would also say that it would be very, it might be helpful. And what I've got as a note to the chief is to clarify that with a little bit more specificity, so that in fact, since this is going to be a public document, not just an internal document, that we all know that there's a distinction made. If you're driving a vehicle, no matter what age you are, you follow the rules of the road. So that's another consideration. You would still treat the juvenile you might, if you're an experienced officer, you might treat the juvenile differently than you might treat, say, me, though not in the sense of giving them a ticket or not giving them a ticket, but recognizing that I'm going to react very differently than my 16-year-old nephew who's driving a vehicle in Bennington.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion, it doesn't matter what age, or I could stop an 80-year-old and they'll act just as immature as a 15-year-old. So
True.
My personal opinion is there is no age where people just get treated a certain differently. Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as being treated the same manner as adults, it's, I mean, when we engage with someone, we're talking with them, the most that would happen differently is maybe different language being used, like, "Oh, hey man, how you doing today?" to a teenager, rather than such a person such as yourself. "Hello, sir, how are you today?" Something like that's, it's going to be a slightly different demeanor, but it's just an effort to build rapport and to be a good flow of communication between everybody that's involved.
Gotcha.
I would like to recommend that when these policies are made available to the public, I'm assuming that's going to be done on the Bennington Police Department website or the town site.
Yep.
That any vague references to Vermont law are specified. So using juveniles as an example, it says officer, in line 33, officer will follow the procedures set forth by the Vermont law. But in other parts of this policy/procedure, the law is specified. So I would recommend providing a reference point and even linking the laws.
I'm always fond of making sure that happens. I'll be honest and say that my capacity to make sure that there are links, active links, probably is less likely. Although in an ideal world, Kara, that's where I would go. But certainly references, I think, are are doable. That's not that hard. You should know that, you wouldn't know, but there will be a header on this that's going to look very different than what you see here. And it'll be a header that we're creating that will have references to, cross-references to other policies, cross-references to statutes, and by section and whatever, by citation. But I agree, within the document itself, when it refers to Vermont law, yes, the officers have been trained to know what we're talking about, but this dual purpose is something new for this. So that should be added. I agree. I have a note to make sure that that happens.
Bruce, I'm glad to hear you say that, because one of the other pieces of feedback that I had was to make sure that other policies are cross-referenced and references are.
Yep. Yeah. We will, that happens. That will happen. And I will make a note of it right now. I will send you, actually, there's going to be one coming out, 3 policies that are going to come out for the town, for the select board meeting in probably tomorrow. And they will have the new header on it. But I'll think to send you all. It's a header that was developed through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, which I think was particularly helpful for the most part. Some categories in there weren't as helpful for the town, but most of it is. It'll cross-check statutory language or statute location, as well as, and in this case, a lot of it'll be Title 13, as you can imagine, and cross-reference with other policies that will be up. So I would assume maybe use of force will be in there. Certainly, the code of conduct will be. That's one of the policies that we're going to be looking at next spring. So code of conduct will be there.
Is this header the reason why I have 27 pages, but Lon has 29?
I don't know why Lon, no, because I didn't include it in this. I don't know why Lon has 29. Okay. I sent the same document to all of you at the same time. So I have 27. Dan has 27. Probably a different computer setup, that's all. So for example, this is the first policy that we've ever seen that has an actual table of contents on it. And that's probably because it is really 5 different policies all at once. So from what I can tell, the general order is really has 5 sections. And what I'd like to do is, and I know some of this just seems like nuts and bolts, but if we could, my sense would be, if we keep the table of contents, because that might be easier for the police to have up front underneath the header, then the very next section, the very next statement would be under part 1, traffic enforcement, and it would be the purpose statement, and then a policy statement, and then any definitions that we think are necessary to go with that. I will also, that's where, for instance, I think we should make sure that we include in the policy statement something close to what the Vermont State Police's statement is regarding the paper trail for every stop. That would cover everything that goes below it. So that's the purpose of, that's why we would want to do this. Currently, these are all in big blocks of prose. My suggestion is that they not be that way, but that they could be in paragraph form. They could be broken out so that there might be 2 or 3 different purposes, for example. And then each section seems to have its own purpose or policy statement. And then, and some sections of this, in particularly the later ones, have follow that same pattern of purpose, policy, definitions. They can go with each of those sections as far as I'm concerned, but they could also be collated at the very front, whichever works for us and whichever works for the PD.
Bruce,
It's the functioning of it that matters. Yeah,
I'm sorry to go back to
no,
that.
go back to it.
Page 10, line 34 indicates that there's 29 pages to the policy.
So page 10, this is under speed enforcement.
Yes.
So Michelle, if you could go to on yours, page 10, line 24, operation of radar laser units. I think. Seven, yeah, we're getting there. There we go, right there. Hey, Kara.
For me, it's line 34. For Michelle, it looks like it's line 33, page 11 of 29. But
Yeah, okay.
you see the
Sorry, I see where that was.
Okay.
Yes, you can just cross. That's one I missed. When I was pulling this off the Bennington PD electronic version, they didn't use a computer to establish page numbers. They just used it like a typewriter.
Oh.
So every time they came to the bottom of a page, that was put in there. Just ignore, if you see another one, ignore it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Mea culpa.
I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
No, you're not. What happened there was
I get
just,
it.
back when people were typing on computers and they didn't think they were computers, they thought they were typewriters. That's what we ended up with. So this original was actually more like 30 something pages.
So I agree with you with the structure of each section because
Mhm.
it does vary. It seems to vary from section to section.
Yep.
So I think standardizing that across all of your policies
Yes. I agree.
is necessary.
It makes it easier to utilize. By the way, you should know that the police officers hopefully will be having all of this. One of the other blessings of this process will be that we will have them so that they're not going to have a book, but rather these will all be accessible to them through their computer. That's the long range, actually even a short range goal of the chief is to make sure that these are all available because we're going to be standardizing their look. A lot of these are things that the chief received initially, inherited.
Mhm.
So that's, so the process, whether something is called a protocol or a general order or a policy, nobody seems to know the difference between any of that stuff. They are all policies, basically. We're treating them all as policies. Let's put it that way. So here's what I'd like to do. We have now gone an hour and a half. And Dan Monks looks like he's panicking at the moment because we haven't written a single word. That's not going to be don't worry. I'm going to ask us to take a quick, it is now 2:30 or close to 2:30. I'm going to ask us to take a quick 5-minute break to do whatever you need to do. You may feel like you don't need to do anything. I need to stand up. I need to move a little bit for about 5 minutes, and I will be back in 5 minutes, and then we will start actual word work. Okay?
Can I ask the dance questions while you're?
Oh, you
doing that?
certainly may. And if they say anything that I need to hear, they'll make sure that they talk to us.
So,
But make sure you give them a break.
so the police department is unionized, as I understand it.
Mhm.
Is that's correct? And
Yes,
so there's a collective bargaining agreement.
yes.
Okay, so to what extent do department policies get reflected in the collective bargaining agreement? Like a violation of a department policy can result in a corrective action or something to that effect? Is there any interplay between these policies and what the collective bargaining agreement says in terms of, officer supervision or corrective action?
So, Lon, I can answer that somewhat. I have to go back and look, but I do know that when we recently negotiated the collective bargaining agreement, we were looking at it. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, that it's so hard to deal with police because the collective bargaining agreements are so tough, et cetera, et cetera." I can tell you that we didn't find anything included in the collective bargaining agreement that would limit anything that we do in policy other than, pay and that sort of thing. So if you're asking, does the collective bargaining agreement hamstring us in any way on these policies? The answer is very, very unlikely that it would.
Yeah, that's not the question I had. I like
Okay.
collective bargaining agreements because they're pretty good procedurally and substantively. I guess what I'm asking is the language of the collective bargaining agreement such that if an officer is not following one of these policies, could they be effectively supervised or corrective action implemented or even a discharge if it
Yes.
was serious enough because they weren't following these policies?
Yes.
Okay,
The collective bargaining agreement doesn't protect them from failing to follow policy or directives from the chief.
Yeah, there's
Not
nothing
that
that
not that
overrides
it
policy.
protects them, but the violation of policy is grounds within the collective bargaining agreement to take an adverse employee action.
So I don't know what you're asking exactly, Lon. I can tell you that there's nothing in the collective bargaining agreement that would not allow the chief or the administration to pursue a disciplinary action based on a violation of a policy.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have to go. I have some computer issues, so I'm going to have to get.
Me too, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm all set. Thanks, Dan.
Want to use, if it's encompassing enough, and particularly when we get to the policy stuff, perhaps and this is where Michelle gets to really start to work. She will make additions to the document that you're seeing on the left side of your screen. I think it's the left side of everybody's. And she'll make those changes when I tell her to, not when anybody else tells her to. That way, it's confusing enough if it's just one of us. So what I'd like us to do, if you're ready for it or willing to participate in this, maybe even if you're not, and we're still waiting for Officer Farrar, but I'm wanting to get started because it's now, I know he was in for a little longer. What do you think of this language? The purpose of this the purpose language is really intended to set the scene, and then the policy is to really state these are our fundamental understandings about what we want the police in Bennington to be doing regarding traffic enforcement. and vehicular stops.
Bruce,
Yeah,
can I start?
yeah.
Okay. I'm on page, I know you don't have it up, but I'm on page 9 of the IACP report.
We can't have that up because we don't have it.
Yeah, but I'm just telling you where
Okay,
I'm coming from.
yeah,
And it states, in internal interviews and focus groups, it was clear that the Bennington Police Department leadership places a heavy emphasis on traffic enforcement. It was also clear that traffic stops are seen as a strategy to locate criminal activity and reduce crashes. Neither of those two purposes are included in the purpose statement. And I think they should be.
okay. Yep, I would say it's probably not you're right, it's not explicitly stated there. So we probably ought to say it there. I don't have a problem with it. So the purpose of the policy is to establish, I like the beginning of it, procedures for traffic law enforcement through proactive, preventive enforcement and reactive patrols by outlining acceptable methods and establishing the guidelines for proper detection, investigation, processing, and reporting of traffic law violators. You could also add right there, additionally, hang on, Michelle, don't write it yet. Additionally, traffic or traffic enforcement helps to prevent vehicle crashes and detects other criminal activity or something. Is that, Robert, where you were going?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think we need as many words.
Right.
Reporting of traffic law violators, comma, reduce the incident or the number of vehicle crashes, comma, and to assist the police department in locating criminal activity, period.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Does anybody have a problem with that?
I'm fine with that. I would change the title as well because it's broader than just traffic enforcement.
I would agree.
It's also roadside stops.
Yep.
For law enforcement.
Right. So yes, I think we'll have a better notion of what we want to call this. I know that the IACP in its report was talking about something broader than just traffic enforcement. When they were thinking about policy, I think it includes roadside stops, vehicular stops, whatever we want to call them, and traffic enforcement. I think that's really what we're talking about here. And that's really what the whole 27 or 29 pages are talking about, as I can see. So, Robert, let's go back to where you were.
Okay.
Traffic law violators. At that point, Michelle, just before the period,
Comma. To reduce the number of vehicle crashes.
Or reducing
Okay.
vehicle crashes. Comma, and we'll probably have to get rid of the and before reporting traffic violators, but what's the other line?
Assisting the police department in locating criminal activity.
Or assisting,
just say or other law enforcement.
Law enforcement, whatever you want to say.
Assisting and assisting
law enforcement.
Well, this is going to be specifically for the PD. So assisting, we haven't mentioned them yet. So assisting the Bennington Police Department, and then after that, the usual parentheses BPD. From this point forward in the policy, it'll always say BPD, not.
Would it be more helpful, we just give you the gist and we work on the words thing later?
Yeah. Right, but I will never remember this if I don't have Michelle at least type it down.
Okay.
And then it will be, trust me, just the gist.
Okay.
In assisting the BPD in
Locating
or identifying criminal activity.
Now the language in the report says locating criminal activity, not identifying.
I understand that. I'm not going to worry about the report because the report they don't even want us to utilize their language necessarily.
Wow.
So, and then I do happen to like this next sentence because it really does. How do we feel about that language? Sound good?
I think it's good.
Yeah.
Bruce,
just needs to be
add one
enforced.
thing.
Right.
To establish procedures, I say policies and procedures because this is overreaching for the whole document.
Yeah.
Right.
So can we go back to where does it say that?
Right at the beginning.
Yep. To establish policies and procedures. Yep. Policies and. Thank you, Dan.
And Bruce?
Yep. And just delete the and right before reporting of traffic violators. That and. Right.
Well, you
there.
want a comma.
Right.
Yeah.
You also need to get
Oh, wait a
rid-
second. Maybe
get rid of
you
the
don't.
word. Bruce,
Go ahead, Kara.
you need to get rid of the word the after reducing.
Right.
Unless you say the number of, but yeah. you
Yeah,
can just
we're
rid
gonna
of the
get
word.
we're not gonna get that wordy. I'd like
Yeah.
this purpose statement to be relatively short
Right.
because we can be more specific in paragraphs in the policy statement.
Certainly.
But we feel good about that for the moment.
Yeah, we still need to get rid of the word and.
Well, actually, I think it's investigation, processing, and reporting of traffic violators is one concept.
Oh, okay.
See what I mean?
All right.
Okay. So I'm gonna move us on. Michelle, if you want to go to the next page, my sense of this, and I'll ask the chief what he wants to do, but is that this table of contents could go in the back, or we are going to put the purpose statement next to the policy statement. So A or one, maybe it goes in the front. I don't know. Let's not worry about that. Let's go to page 2 where it says policy. It's the next yellow section. There we go. Now,
I had a question about this.
I have lots of questions about this, so go ahead.
What is the significance of distinguishing officer and supervisor in line 31?
Dan?
I think it has to do with rank.
Dan, let's let Dan tell us.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out where we are on that.
We're on line 31. It's actually 30 and 31 of page 2. Enforcement of the traffic laws of Vermont is the responsibility of every officer and supervisor. I take it supervisors are not officers.
Yeah,
In
it's
the
just to
lingo of-
clarify. It's just to clarify the rank. It's more than just the bottom line officers. It incorporates the corporals and
the
sergeants
sergeants.
and lieutenants and chief
Yeah.
and all that are out on patrol.
Right.
Thank you.
Since they all do patrol anyway, but you're right. Okay, so that's why this inclusion of both officers. Dan is an officer. Lieutenant Grandy is considered a supervisor. He's not an officer. I think that's how we would look at it.
Okay, thank you.
It is here where I actually think this, even a second paragraph, and in fact, maybe a second or a third paragraph. We'll worry about the wordsmithing of it, but for instance, the inclusion of the state police statement, and if I have this, Lon, you used the language earlier, and it has to do with reporting. This would be where I think it would be in this section where we would deal with under policy. So it is the policy of the BPD to report every vehicular stop using forms made available to the officers, or some such language as that.
Isn't that happening already, though?
Whether it's happening or not is not going to be the question, Robert. Yes, it is happening.
Right.
But the problem is, what we want to have is an enforceable mechanism by which, and I think it's there in part, as Officer Ferrara has indicated. I think it's under each one. All data will be entered and completed on the face of the written warning, for example. But I think Lon has made a good and valid point that it is possible, even under the current documentation, to make a vehicular stop. I don't think that anybody does this, but I think it's possible to have a vehicular stop and not have any documentation of it other than a video cam and a dash cam. And I would want us to say that's not what we do.
How are you going to monitor that?
We monitor that the way we monitor police actions in any other circumstance, which is by feedback from the members of the public and by supervision by the supervisory levels of the department.
So if there's no documentation of a traffic stop and that officer's body cam is not randomly selected for review,
right?
How do you fill that gap?
Tara, you don't in the very same way that a clinician at UCS could in fact see and treat a person that is one of their clients on the street and never document it.
Well, an example might be a clinician has no notes, but in the master calendar of all of the patients seen, that patient shows up on the calendar. So my question is, does the dispatcher have a record when people call in and say, I've pulled over such and such a vehicle, as the procedure lays out, the information that they're supposed to give the dispatcher as to a stop that they've made? Is there some way to cross-check that data so that somebody, if they wanted to, could say, hey, we had this stop, but we've got nothing.
Right.
There has to be checks and balances.
There does have to be checks and balances, but we have to start with language which says these are the expectations, these are the demands of this profession. If we don't say that somewhere in the policy explicitly so that everybody can see it, then I think enforcement of it becomes harder. That's why I would say here under traffic enforcement and before types of enforcement action, there ought to be several other paragraphs. One of them is that every stop will be documented on the forms that are appropriate for that stop.
Right, but what I'm asking is, do the dispatchers, it's just a question, it's not a judgment. Do dispatchers record stops?
Dan, I think you're on.
Yes. Yep. So every time we make a traffic stop, we radio to dispatch that we are on a traffic stop, and with this vehicle, so it is on record with our dispatch that we are on a traffic stop. And
So
then that all gets kept. It's called the radio log.
Right.
And when we are complete with a traffic stop, we radio to dispatch that we are complete with that stop. And then it's, as the policy states, it's our responsibility to issue paperwork with that traffic stop, whether it be a warning or a ticket or anything
Or
else.
whatever.
But,
Right.
but the dispatcher doesn't have any paper to match up to it because it's
Well,
it's on a radio log. It's a
correct. Yep. So it's it's logged in the system that we made a traffic stop.
Right.
And then it would be like Kara was saying, or Kara, the checks and balances. The opportunity is there to check and balance things because everything is logged on the radio log that we made a traffic stop, and then the warnings and tickets that we submit to be entered into the system are also there. So there's the checks and balances, and it would be a supervisory role to compare that and make sure everything balances out.
Okay, so the radio log is a piece of paper as well, or a
Nope,
or a
it
computer
is
document.
computerized.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And if I could ask the officer a question real quick, how common is it that an officer would make a traffic stop without reporting that to dispatch?
It would not be common at all. It would be
Okay.
it would not happen.
That doesn't happen.
'Cause
Okay.
that's- Nope, because it's one, the main reason that we call things out is for our safety.
Right.
Traffic stops are one of the most dangerous things that we do because we
Yeah.
are encountering someone that we do not know. It could be an 80-year-old man that's on his way to church. It could be some a gangster up from New York City that is here to do harm. It could be an 80-year-old man up from New York City to do harm. We have no idea who we're going to encounter. So it is for number one is our safety. That's why we call it out to dispatch, so that every other officer knows that where we are, who we're with, and what we're doing, so that if things do go south, we will know what to do to respond.
So are we suggesting that we don't need to put any language in here that says paper will be? I mean, or reports?
No, we're not. I think to Kara's point, she was saying, if somebody doesn't turn in a piece of paper,
How will we know?
is there any other information that would say, hey, we've got somebody who's not following the protocol because they're not turning in
Right.
reports of traffic stops? And what Dan's pointed out was we have this other database, which is the radio log.
Right.
That would show that these stops have been made. And so a supervisor could say, you're not getting your stop, your race forms or whatever
Mm-hmm.
in, or you're not getting them in on a timely basis or whatever the issue is. So I thought Kara's point was well taken. And
Yeah, no, I agree.
And to the extent that we want to mention the fact that there's a log kept of these stops, independent of the officer, would close the loop on this.
Right. Right. So, Michelle, just for my sake, if you can move us to a new paragraph under, yep, right there, just move us down to create a new paragraph. There we go. I'm still looking for the line. If you could direct me, you had it.
Yeah, it's paragraph 3.0. On our materials, it was page 11.
Yep. No, it's
3.1A, I believe.
yes.
Not 11 of the Bennington protocol, but the overall page 11 of the 58 pages.
I know it's the Vermont State Police document. So, okay. So, Michelle's just so that we can have something to work with. Write the following: all roadside stop data shall be documented on the written forms made available to the officer. Additionally, period, after officer, period. Additionally, all roadside, I won't worry about whether that's a word, stops shall be recorded on the dispatcher's radio log. I don't like roadside, but that's the language that's in the state police document.
You want me to screen share that with you, the state police?
I don't have the state. Well, I probably
I'm
do.
looking, I have it right now. I can just screen share and you can look at it.
Yeah, I mean, can you? You got to be made co-host to screen share. Dan, can you allow Lon to be a co-host? You're muted, so
I can cut and paste it to you and send it to you in an email right now.
that's fine.
Yeah, unfortunately, Bruce, I don't have. I'm on another computer, so I'd have to.
Okay. Oh, it's down the other computer, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Never mind. It's the technology that we're working with. So it's because we have to have somebody be your host, but on the other side. If you want to send it to me, we know that language is there. The other thing that we wanted to, and we can, I can come back and wordsmith it. I'm not worried about that. I'm trying to get concepts. The other thing that we were going to make sure was that what Dan calls the information that's coming from the race data sheet. I hate that terminology, by the way. Officer Ferrara, it's not your fault. It's what you call it. It's what it's called when you're there. That information is sent back or is reported back on a regular basis to the chief and to, I think it probably ought to be either the assistant town manager or the town manager, for review, for purposes of review, or in order to review the data and see what we learn.
Let me just ask you something real quick. Is
Sure.
that information that's entered into a statewide database?
You betcha.
Yes.
And so does the chief have the ability to go in and extract that data on his own, or is it provided to him?
That's a question I don't know the technical answer to. Dan Ferrara, do you happen to know the answer to that? Probably not.
I don't know it, but I would have an educated guess that he does have access to it in one way or another, because it would be a tool to help supervise your staff.
That would be my guess. That was going to be my guess, but
Are you sure that including that language in this policy would be appropriate then?
I actually want to make sure that any, and it doesn't have to do with this particular chief, I want to make sure that the chief and somebody else, for the reasons Lon was talking about, knows that and has that information on a regular basis.
I agree with that.
The chief is the employee of the town manager under our system. And it makes perfect sense for for the chief to have that information so that the chief can analyze data regarding the officers, his or her officers. It also makes sense for the town manager to have that data so that the town manager can support and also supervise the chief.
I agree with that. It felt like your statement was very targeted at how the chief was supposed to be using the information, and I'm not entirely sure that that would be appropriate to put in the policy.
If that's what I said, it's not what I meant, but it's the dilemma of not having it. So how do we want to just let's drop down another 2 lines, Michelle, and let's see if we can just put in some general language here that we probably either I could perfect or Dan and I can perfect. I don't think we need to spend tons of time on it, but data collected from traffic stops or data from the, data collected from traffic stops will be reported to the state agency. It's the Agency of Public Safety, right? Shall be reported to the public, we'll get the right state agency, but I think it's the Agency of Public Safety. And then what? Reported back to or collected by the chief and reported to the town manager. Dan Monks, I'm looking at you to sort of give me some sense of how this might work.
Yeah, I'm struggling because I know what we want. We want to get the data. We want to get meaningful reports of the data collected to the chief, the town manager. But unfortunately, we don't process the data. It's another outside agency. So it's an
agency. It's the agent. I
think it's the Department of Public Safety. But
yeah, that's what it is. The Department of Public Safety, right?
But we could have something about something like the chief and shall
report.
So
Or
obtain. So the chief shall obtain all available information from the Department of Public Safety database regarding traffic stops and regular report to the town manager or something like that. I mean,
that makes, I would say the word regularly makes more sense than trying to set up a particular time frame in policy. So, data collected.
Is a statement like this going to be included in every policy?
In every policy under traffic enforcement?
No, every policy across the board.
No, they don't.
They don't do the same kind of data collection.
They don't do the same kind of data collection across the board. If they did, that would be different, but they don't. Okay. So for instance, this was one of the issues when we were dealing 2 weeks ago with dealing with people with a mental health crisis. That's not necessarily collected in that same way. So you might think that they would, but that's not how it's historically done. So that's...
The police department doesn't collect that information.
Nope.
Bruce?
Yeah.
I would just like to suggest that using the word regularly, it takes all the meaning out of it, because that's in a subjective, interpretive word. It could be once every 10 years.
I
as
know.
long as
And
it's once a decade, it's regular. How about quarterly or monthly or something?
The purpose of a policy is to allow flexibility. And I think that particular word supports the flexibility.
Okay.
I'm torn. Yeah.
Dave,
I'm torn, Kara and Robert, about the word. I'd like to get something down here and then maybe highlight that word so that we might work on some way of giving it flexibility without hamstringing, but making sure that it gets done on a very regular basis. So, data collected from vehicle stops. Let's call them that. Michelle, we're back to you. Let me see what I can come up with here, and you'll all help. Data collected from vehicle stops shall be reported to the Department of Public Safety, period, or the state Public of Safety of the state of Vermont, period, of the state of Vermont. Period.
For what purposes?
Great. Yeah, what we want to do is get the data back.
You know, it could say something like the chief of police shall obtain to the extent possible.
Yep.
You know,
Michelle, listen to that. The chief of police shall obtain comma to the extent possible.
Or available.
Yeah.
To the extent available, comma, reports of all vehicle stops by BPD officers and supervisors. You can just say BPD, remember. And supervisors, comma, and report delete, get rid of report, and share the results. I'm going to say regularly for right now, regularly, with the town manager or with the town manager's office. For review and analysis. And Robert, note that you're going to come back with, if we haven't by the end of today changed that language about regularly, when you see it again in 3 or 4 days, it may very well be changed or modified in some way to make it. I want us to give it some flexibility, but I also want us to give some boundaries.
Right.
And
Can I say something?
absolutely.
Okay. The very end of this sentence, and share the results regularly with the town manager's office for review and analysis. That sounds like you are charging the town manager's office with reviewing and analyzing this data. Is that your intent?
No, that's not my intent. My intent is that it be utilized for review and analysis, probably by the chief, but that be shared with the town, that would be shared with the town manager.
Then those are two different things.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm happy. I'm not wed to any of this language. Trust me. This
Sure.
stuff comes in and goes out. So and okay, the chief
I
of
don't know
police
if we
shall
need-
obtain for review and analysis, or to the extent possible, reports of all vehicle stops by BPD officers and then Michelle, all you have to do is after the word supervisors, write in for review and analysis and delete it from the other. I knew you. Okay.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
delete it from there and put a period after office.
That's
How's
better.
that? Does that get at some of the issues? We still don't know to what degree the public has access to these documents. And I think that's something that we need to look at and at least identify. I mean, there's a number of issues here, both in terms of the collective bargaining agreement, probably, and privacy of the officers, but and privacy of the. I mean, I don't know what the data looks like when it comes back. So, do we want to put something in there about public access, or should we not worry about FOIA requests at this point?
Well, I think I would like it put in there,
Mhm.
but highlighted in some way, maybe the yellow highlighting to
We can do
indicate
that.
that it's added for further discussion, rather than
Right.
not have it there and
Right.
not have
And
the
lose it.
discussion.
Right. So Michelle, drop down to another paragraph and just write the following and highlight it in some color. Maybe not yellow, but something that we can read through.
Fuchsia.
And put down public access to these records by officer. And because that's really where it's going to be looked at. I mean, if it's shared with between the town manager, yeah, that's good. And can you put down after that maybe something like just after the word officer, research and discussion. Thank you. And then highlight it. Didn't know the highlight was going to go away, but good. Figure out some.
It's under the home tab.
Yeah, it is. They're right there. Yep. Pick a color.
There you go.
I love it.
I can't tell the
Thanks,
difference,
Michelle.
but I'm colorblind.
Uh-oh.
Oh, shoot.
So, Bruce, I think that sharing the data that's not personal is a goal that that it's perfectly appropriate to put in this policy.
Yep.
Without even highlighting it. I am very, very, I guess I'll say, concerned about any identifying information being released just willy-nilly. I mean, there may be instances where someone may have made a complaint and they have a right to it, but I feel really uncomfortable just putting out data like that.
Me too. And
Officer.
And my perception is the Department of Public Safety probably has rules about this.
Yeah.
And without my knowing what they are, I would prefer being able to go to the public, to somebody there and do a little research on. I mean, Vermont generally makes things available to the public. I agree with you about making the general records of what the chief shares with the town manager, the analysis of, okay, we've done this many stops, there are this many people of this age, blah, 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 as a department, that I think should be fully accessible to the public. And maybe we want to, and Robert, this might help with the regularly question, maybe at the end of that second paragraph, now the third paragraph really, the data collected paragraph, state that the manager will make that available, that analysis available to the select board and to the members of the public, on a regular, when they do it. So that might actually be more helpful than what we get on I think it's a monthly basis, where we get the total number of different kinds of offenses, traffic violations that the police department have written tickets, but no context for it. What do you think, Dan?
I think it's a great, it should make a statement that something about that reports produced by the Department of Public Safety regarding traffic stops shall be made available, shall be posted on the police department
website.
website at least annually or something like that.
Yeah.
Because that's going to
Yeah.
be data that everybody can see, and I think it'll be helpful for the public and the officers, because
Yeah.
confident it's not going to show any problems, and if it does, we'll deal with it quickly.
Yeah. So Michelle, why don't we at least say this after the word office, period. We're going to say reports from the Department of Public Safety of BPD traffic stops. Safety, yep. BPD traffic stops or vehicle stops, whatever. I think we're calling vehicle stops now. Shall be made public at least annually on the town website. Why not?
I mean, and that goes along with one of the specific recommendations of the AICP that data like that be made available regularly. So we're following that
Yeah.
recommendation.
And we may want to end up saying at least semi-annually.
I just don't know how often the Department of Public Safety runs a report.
I don't know either. And that's part of what I want to find out from them.
Yeah.
It's now that I'm thinking about it, that's why these meetings are really helpful, because then you get to know what questions do I need to ask. And there is enough time between this meeting and when anything gets adopted that this will be back and forth to you folks several times. Could very well be. Okay. Does that pretty much deal with, I'm trying to check off things that we were talking about. I think it does begin to address issues of accountability. And Michelle, when we're just talking and you have a chance, can we eliminate the word roadside each time and just put in vehicle stops? Let's just call them that uniformly. Officer Ferrara, do you see any problem with us changing that just to vehicle stops?
The only thing is through Title 23, we enforce pedestrian and bicycle laws and all that too.
I know.
So it's not just vehicle.
Right. Are the pedestrian ones, are they also reported up to the Department of Public Safety?
Yep. It would be because it would be a violation. We would still issue paperwork on that if we stop someone for a violation.
All right. Well, let's worry about that later. I guess the vast majority of these are vehicle stops.
Right, but just to be clear, Dan, you report these even if there's not a violation.
Well, if there's not a violation, we don't stop somebody. We don't just stop someone walking down the road and say, "Hey, come here."
You can
unless it's part of an investigation. Yeah, if it's part of an investigation, and then at that point, if we're on a call or some other investigation, then we're doing an entire written report. But these are pertaining to self-initiated stops. People violating traffic laws, people violating bicycle laws, people violating pedestrian laws.
Well, my understanding is this is not just about that. There doesn't have to be a violation for this policy to be relevant.
I agree. And parts of this policy indicate that a violation isn't necessary or the determination hasn't been made yet.
Right.
I don't read that at all with this policy. I mean, this policy is in reference to the title of it is traffic enforcement. That's all self-initiated stops. These aren't calls for service. These aren't investigations of criminal activity. These are just going out, finding traffic violations and stopping vehicles and bicycles and
Right.
cars.
but-
Okay, let me give you an example of why I think this is important. So I'm 22 years old. I'm sitting in front of my apartment building in a car with the lights out at 1 a.m, and the police watch me sit out in front of this house, not knowing me, my car, with out-of-state plates or anything else. And the reason I'm sitting there, which they don't know, is the person I hope to be the girlfriend doesn't know where I live. So she knows the street. And if I sit there, she'll see my car and then notice park, and then we can go inside. But the police decided to investigate it because it was suspicious activity. And I had to answer a whole bunch of questions. To me, it was the same as a roadside stop. The exact same situation happened in a book called Just Mercy. The author was a black lawyer sitting in front of his apartment, and the reason he was sitting there at 10 o'clock at night was he wanted to hear the end of a song on his car radio. But he was not only stopped, he was pulled out of the car, and when he was upset that he was being vigorously interrogated and told he shouldn't be there, the officer pulled a gun on him. Now, we are not in Alabama, but I like the idea that this policy says that if there is an investigatory stop by an officer on patrol involving a vehicle or whatever, that's going to be reported somehow, as opposed to somebody saying, well, we weren't pulling him over for a motor vehicle violation, so we don't have to report it. That's where my concern is, Dan.
Yep. So
And
the examples that you were giving seem like they start off as a consensual encounter, where if someone's just seen sitting in a car or standing outside of a building, there's nothing prohibiting an officer from just walking by and saying, "Hi, sir, how are you today? Is everything okay?" Stuff like that. There's not documentation, and from wherever that goes. That's just part of police work. Is it can be a windy path to get to an end point, but just saying, if I notice someone standing outside of a building or sitting in a car, not necessarily breaking any laws or anything, but there's nothing stopping me from being able to go up and say hi to them and kind of get a feel for how they're doing without that being recorded.
But that was not the officer's attitude. They said, "What are you doing here?"
Yep. I mean, it could
that
be all.
To me, it's an investigatory stop
Okay.
based on
I mean,
the
I
Terry
can't-
standard of a
reasonable
suspicious activity, reasonable
Yeah.
suspicion.
Mhm.
And so the difference between you and I is the way we're characterizing these stops. As the civilian, I don't feel like it's hey, how's it hanging? Consensual conversation. It's a law enforcement officer engaged in a law enforcement activity. If I had said some things that further perked his concern about criminal activity, the matter could have escalated. Had I been
So
a
I
different,
can't speak.
had I been
So
a
I can't
different
speak
color,
on how they.
they could have been
I
different.
can't speak on how they do that in a book that you read.
No,
Well,
I'm
the
talking
story,
about
I'm not familiar.
my experience.
Okay. Well, you also alluded to a book that you read as well. So I can't speak on that because, as you said, that was years back. That was different states, possibly. I don't know your specific situation in general, but I can speak on how we do things here and now in the town of Bennington. And that is, we can do a.
Hang on a second,
I'm
Robert.
suggesting that it would be nice to have it reported so that we can
And
track
I'm going to
these
explain
things
that.
for purposes of making sure that there's not discriminatory behavior.
Yep,
Right.
and that's what I'm explaining here, is I can only speak on how we do things here and now and in the town of Bennington, how we police.
Mhm.
And that is, there's nothing stopping us from doing a casual encounter and approaching someone and saying, hi, hello, how are you? From there, if that's where it ends, then that's where it ends, and that there's absolutely no need for that to be documented every time I say hi to somebody. But if it does go down a slope to where I do end up doing some sort of investigation or inquiry on someone's whereabouts or what they're doing and all of that, and kind of getting into an investigation, then what happens is a call for service is punched. Doesn't necessarily, not all calls for service come in from a phone call to dispatch reporting an incident. We do a lot of self-generated calls by doing just that. We're proactive. We will go out and encounter someone. And then when there is a call punched for that, we then go back and we document everything that happened in a written report and who was involved and everything like that. So it's documented in other ways. It's not documented the conventional written warning as in a traffic stop.
Right. Let me just remind everybody that to some degree, what we're looking at, and I would want us to be clear about it, is that this is really a general order that was compiled. And so not everything that is written at the beginning necessarily covers everything that is in the whole document. At least that's been my perception. So while it's true that it's about traffic enforcement and that it's about in general, and most everything is about it, not every scenario that's even in the document itself deals with a traffic stop. It might be a vehicle stop, but it may very well not be a traffic stop. And though for the most part, and I get Lon's point, I think Lon's point is well made. I'm not sure. I would want us to come back and take a look at it. One of the places where I would say we're talking about vehicle stops and not necessarily traffic stops is the area of DUI enforcement on just a DUI, in the section, I just had it. It deals with sobriety checkpoints. Sobriety checkpoints are in fact vehicle stops, but they are not necessarily traffic stops.
Right.
And I'm looking on page 21. So just logistically, when I'm stopped at a sobriety checkpoint, which I have been here in Bennington, and it's something I would expect the police to do. I don't think that unless there's some other investigation that goes on, not every stop of every car needs to be documented. Although I'm still reflexively supportive of Lon's notion that there are stops of vehicles that right now under the current policy aren't covered by documentation. And maybe sobriety checkpoints are not the right place to be thinking about that, but that's one place where I actually don't think they need to be documented unless there's something else.
Bruce?
But there is another one. Hang
Can I
on.
say,
Yes, Robert.
okay. I just feel compelled to mention, I understand Lon's concern, and that is not to be discounted or disregarded. But I just do want to make a statement that not every interaction between a police officer and a citizen is a law enforcement activity. We expect much more of our police than simply law enforcement. A welfare check is probably the best example. So like I say, I understand exactly what your concern is, and I think it should be dealt with. But I just do want to make a statement that we expect more from the police than simply law enforcement. So for an officer to walk up to someone and ask him how he is, if he's okay, that's perfectly understandable, perfectly acceptable. He's doing the job that we want him to do, to see if that person is all right. So I just want to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Bruce, your points incorporated like in the sobriety checkpoints because, and I wouldn't expect a written report of those stops because everyone is being stopped or every third car is being stopped or what have you. And
Mhm.
it takes the discretion out of it and it's merely, and then once they pull someone aside and said, we need to know a little bit more about you because your car is filled with smoke and it smells like grass. Then that would seem to me that would be documented, but not every single car that goes through the sobriety checkpoint. But when they decide to identify a particular person for a stop, or the purpose of the stop is not concern about somebody like they've got a flat tire or whatever, but it's actually, I think this person is engaged in suspicious activity, and they call it into dispatch to say, I'm investigating such and such a car at such and such a time and place, then I think it would be good for there to be something written up by the officer that I made this brief investigatory stop.
So are you
So-
are you basing that off of the sobriety checkpoint scenario? Because that already happens. Like you said, we make a plan ahead of time that either every car, every other car, every third car, however it may be, gets stopped at the checkpoint and has an interaction with an officer. Unless we have another reason to continue to hold that vehicle and that operator, that being either reasonable suspicion that they are committing a crime, such as DUI, or they have some other violation going on, such as defective equipment or expired registration or what have you, they will then be pulled to the side and a traffic stop will start at that point where it gets called into dispatch that we are going to be out with this vehicle with this registration at the checkpoint. And then we will call in that license. And then at the conclusion of that interaction, a either warning or ticket or an arrest or whatever will be issued. But other than that, if a vehicle is stopped at the sobriety checkpoint and the short interaction happens with that officer and there's deemed to be no issues, they get waved through. There is no documentation on that specific vehicle or specific operator, but it does get put into the statistics for that checkpoint that happened, because at the conclusion of that checkpoint, we put together a report of how many vehicles came through altogether. Like 1,500 vehicles came through. We encountered this many operators. As a result, this many tickets, this many warnings, and this many arrests happened. So again, given that sobriety checkpoint scenario, all of that is documented in some way or another, especially if the car gets pulled over to the side for further investigation into the situation.
So Dan, I agree with all that. I wouldn't change any of it.
No.
It's when I think one of the behaviors that people are concerned about is when people of color or they're trans or whatever are sitting in a vehicle, and those type of people are more frequently having police interactions that what are you doing here, da 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 da, and then letting them go. I think that's when people feel like they're being singled out because of their sexual orientation or sexual identity or color of their skin or what have you. And so I'm concerned that if the idea is to try to make police enforcement more uniform, if an officer is going to decide to do some sort of investigatory stop rather than a casual social interaction, that it should be documented, because they would have called it into dispatch that they're investigating a particular car at a particular place, and then that would match up with the police report, a brief investigation of suspicious activity, nothing, no violation, no warning. Then later on, if one officer's numbers are coming back, if we can get those numbers, that they're routinely stopping people of color and not white people, it would raise questions whether there should be any sort of adverse action or corrective action. That's an entirely different question, but it certainly would somebody say, I wonder why this is going on.
If it's not what you're saying is if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Right.
Right. I agree with that.
Excuse me, folks. Yep. I think the issue is the report of discretionary stops that don't result in a warning or traffic violation. The question is, how does that happen? And right now, I am at a loss to figure out how we write that into policy, although I think there needs to be something said somewhere about that needs to be documented, because documents make a difference. Documentation does make a difference. I'm also aware that it is now 20 minutes to 4. And while I'm not interested in pushing us forward just for the sake of pushing us forward, I'd like us to, I have that note to myself, and if you're in agreement that the question at hand is reports of discretionary stops that don't end in a warning or violation, then let me, if you would allow me the opportunity to perhaps try to resolve that with some particular language, we could move forward, and rather than just, I think if we're clear about what the issue is, that's the most important thing.
Bruce, I don't think we are clear about the issue.
Okay.
So, because I think what Lon's talking about is not a stop. So it's not covered by this. It's a different issue. It's not that they stopped a vehicle for something. It's that they see something that a police officer thinks, oh, I should check into that, or I should check on that person, or, oh, maybe there's something suspicious happening there. So I think it's a completely separate issue. I don't think it's an unimportant issue. I don't know if it's appropriately addressed in this document. That's why I'm having trouble with it.
Okay.
Could I ask Dan Ferraro a question?
Sure.
If a car seems to be circling a particular house or neighborhood very late at night, is that enough of a suspicious activity to pull somebody over and ask them why they're constantly going back and forth in front of a house, especially if they have like out-of-state plates?
No, we're not going to do a traffic stop based on a car driving around the block multiple times. We would have to see an actual traffic violation, whether it be even something as small as equipment violation or something like that. But in the end, we only stop a vehicle if there is a violation to stop it on. We don't just, it's not Wild West where we're just going out and stopping cars because we want to and we don't like the way that car looks or something. We always have to have a reason to be able to stop that vehicle.
Right, but the reason, Dan, the reason that he gave was that it's circling, say, a block, and in passing in front of a particular house, and that strikes me as a reasonably suspicious activity, to think that a crime is afoot. To use the language that the court loved to use, I hate that language, but that it's a Terry stop. Are you saying that you don't make Terry stops of vehicles you only stop vehicles if there's a violation that you see? Is that, I'm not skeptical. I'm just trying to figure out what the facts are.
Because a vehicle stop is an instant detention. You can't just casually encounter a vehicle and start a conversation with a vehicle to see where it leads. Once you stop a vehicle, that's an immediate detention. You need something to say, this is why I stopped you. With that example, that'll definitely be something that'll raise my eyebrows and cause me to pay my attention to that vehicle. But unless there's an actual violation to stop that vehicle and detain it, there has to be a violation of a law. Other than that, it's not going to happen.
So the rules, just to be clear, Dan, then the rules are different for pedestrians.
No, because with a pedestrian, it's a lot easier to be able to walk by a pedestrian and start a casual encounter by making your presence known and saying, "Hi, sir, how are you tonight? What are you up to? Anything fun tonight? Something like that." None of those are. That's not a detention. We're not holding that person there. We're not making them talk to us. We are just saying, "Hi, how are you?" If they walk away, we have to have some sort of reason to say, "Hey, don't walk away from me. Stay here. I want to talk to you."
Right,
Right.
but reasonable
That's-
suspicion is the basis for the brief detention.
But I'm saying there needs to be some sort of violation. I understand in other states it's especially down south there's a lot more of a laid back or relaxed atmosphere as far as policing can go, where they can just grab
New
you,
York
scoop you right
is
off the street.
not
Yeah,
far south.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
don't
Even
do,
even right
you
over the
don't
border,
do,
they can.
you don't do Terry stops.
It in Vermont, they require us to have grounds to detain somebody, and especially when it gets to the level of going to court and the state's attorney to be able to have a case. It's a lot easier to prosecute a case where you have very valid grounds to hold somebody and detain somebody, rather
but-
than I didn't like the way that guy walked past the building, so I stopped him and asked him what was going on, and eventually got into patting him down and searching him, all that. That's with Vermont. The state is very strict on how policing can take place, and that is one of the areas we are, for
That's
back of letter
helpful.
terms, yeah, for back of letter terminology, our hands are tied behind our back quite well with being able to take people's freedoms away by detaining them and getting
Gotcha.
into further investigation.
Good clarity. I think I've learned something this afternoon. Maybe somebody else has. I'd like us to feel like we have dealt with the front end of this policy, but there are a number of other places. And in the 15 or 12 minutes or so that we have allotted ourselves, I'm wondering if we might just, so that I would have a sense from you folks, so for example, if I were looking at the section that there's a statement of quote unquote policy that is found on page 9. Michelle, page 9, and then that's going to move you down quite a bit. Sort of the next beat. Don't worry about other considerations. And let me just ask a question. This is part and parcel. There we go. This is part and parcel of the way in which this particular document is put together, that it seems to have policies sort of strewn through it. First of all, is this a statement of policy that is necessary? Is it necessary to be here? Or should we move it back? In essence, move all the policy stuff to the front of the document. That's my question. Does everybody see where we are?
I would move it all to the front of the document. It
Okay.
should be an umbrella statement that covers the whole policy, everything.
Yeah, that was my take.
I can see why it's here, though. It seems like the policy statement is in certain sections because it's very specific to those sections.
Well, okay.
So how would you handle that?
Well, it is easier for people to, I mean, this statement, as I see it, employing, I mean, the only thing that distinguishes this from anything else is the employment of numerous methods of traffic enforcement. Right? Is that the distinguishing characteristic of this particular sentence?
I think
If it's that alone doesn't strike me as important enough to be, I mean, I would say that's true about the whole document. In as much as we're talking in the whole document of such things as automated plate readers, radar, laser, and other mechanisms to enforce traffic laws. That would be, it doesn't have to be, I mean, I could go either way. It just struck me as, in this particular instance, it seemed odd that it's here. No thoughts other than Robert's? Officer, let me ask you a question just logistically about the use of the policy. Is it important for the police to see that policy statement right under traffic enforcement detecting violators there, or is it, I mean, logistic use of this strikes me as this is a teaching tool.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I mean, I think it's not a real, I think that's more of a almost an English teacher type opinion. Like Cara was saying, though, this is more specific to this section of the policy, so that's most likely why it was put there in place. But whether it's there or at the very beginning, I don't know that there would be a difference myself.
Okay.
It's all still going to be in writing in black and white somewhere in the document. It's just wherever it's placed is placed.
Right. I mean, this basically is talking about methodologies. And I'm not even sure that it's a policy statement, but it is nonetheless, since it was identified that way.
so. Perhaps it deserves a section called methodology.
Yeah.
And that could be applicable to other parts of this document as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm fine with all that.
Yeah. Ron, did you have, other than the issue about juveniles, did you have other sections within the pages of this that you had particular concerns about?
I had a couple of questions.
Yep.
Dan, the state police occasionally do saturation stops where they chase vehicles and they pull them over and then do a brief investigatory stop and then move on. They'll park outside of, say, a place like Kevin's Restaurant or whatever and try to get every patron who leaves. Does the Bennington PD do that as opposed to checkpoints?
So the definition of a saturation patrol is when 2 or more officers are in the same area conducting traffic enforcement. That's what a saturation patrol is. Where they do that and what the motives are behind that is completely up to the officers that are involved. So I'm not sure what the question would be, really.
Well, do you have like 5 or 6 cars parked out in front of Madison and wait for the patrons to come out and then try to pull everyone over to see if you can get DUI?
I mean, just a person leaving Madison's isn't grounds to stop a vehicle.
Okay.
Again, there would have to be an actual violation observed to be able to stop a vehicle and detain them and investigate something.
Yeah.
Just because you walk out of the doors of a restaurant or a bar doesn't mean as soon as you leave the curb, I'm going to pull you over and detain you, because there's no proof that you would be, I'm assuming you're talking for DUI. There's no proof that you would be DUI just because you came out of a bar, because there's people that are DDs, they'll go into a bar with all their friends and all they drink for the night is water. I mean,
Yep.
there's...
Yeah.
I agree with that, but the state police tell me they do that.
Well, I mean, that could be something that they do, but like I said, I can only speak on
That's
behalf
why I
of.
was asking.
Yeah,
It was just a question, not a comment. So
Yep.
right.
I mean, like I said,
I don't have to
what
do
their
anything
intentions
with
are,
that.
what their intentions are, and what their policies and procedures are, I don't know.
Right.
Oh, I was
I can
just
only speak
asking
on
No, we were
behalf of
asking
us.
what about the BPD, and
Yep.
your answers tells us that it's not something you do.
Right.
Okay.
I'm gonna move us quickly just so I get some quick answers to where I want to go. Lon, you had one other place that you had a question on.
That's okay.
Okay. If you go, Michelle, let's just hold that one, I think, right where it is. I don't have a problem. I probably would change it as the policy of this department to this department employs numerous methods of traffic law, blah, 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 and just leave it like that. The next one that I highlighted is on page 12, Michelle. It has to do with this whole section on automatic license plate readers, ALPRs. This strikes me as coming right out of the Justice Council's identification of, this was a policy that was added at a particular time. And everything about the this automated license plate reader is essentially, this is not unique to Bennington's section. Is my observation correct, Dan, as far as you know? This automated license plate reader system, you've been at the academy recently. I'm assuming they cover all this there as well, and it's essentially the same as this?
I mean, the license plate readers are used worldwide, as far as I know.
Right.
It's not anything
There's
specific
nothing
to
unique
Bennington.
to Bennington about this.
Nope. All it does is it's a fancy way of being able to read multiple license plates in a very short amount of time, run them to make sure that there's no stolen cars, expired registrations, license suspended, all that.
Right. And so far as you're concerned, yeah, the language that goes all the way over through up to where it says procedure, the purpose, policy, and definition section of this section is essentially unique to license readers, correct?
Correct. Yep. And
Yeah.
it's pretty standard because it's a piece of equipment and it's how you use that equipment.
Right. Kara.
I had a question in the number 2.
In the number, oh yes, under policy.
Yep, on page 13, row 7, if it's the same.
Well, it's apparently not the same as everybody's, but I know what you mean. It's under automated license plate readers. It's right where we are. And it's right there. Is it all data and digital images? That's the question.
Where it reads, law enforcement agencies can also interface their own locally compiled hot list to the ALPR system.
Okay, so it's the hot list identification. So Michelle, move up just a smidge. It's under the definition of hot list. There we go.
Under what basis can that be done?
Let me read this and get some clarification for you. So I'm not too familiar because we don't have any running LPRs right now anyway. So I'm not too familiar with the system, but what I would interpret that as covering would be if we take a report or get a BOL or a be on the lookout. Let's say someone is coming from New Hampshire and they're known to be a dangerous person. Maybe they're homicidal, suicidal, stuff like that. Their registration in the car that they might be traveling in their registration and license information might be put into this list, so that if they do pass a automated
ALPR,
license,
right.
yep, an ALPR, if they do pass that, it will alert that system saying this car was just spotted driving on this road.
Right.
That would be my best educated guess on how they enter their own lists for circumstances like that.
So Kara, what was your concern about that?
It wasn't a concern, it was a question. Under what basis?
Okay. So, yeah. So are you okay with that?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
absolutely.
I was proposing that we not change anything under this particular section. It didn't seem to make any sense, and that we leave it right where it is. Because it seems to go right here. It belongs right here, and it was designed, and it references that section. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I know it's after 4. And to some degree, Michelle, if you would just move on quickly to page 15. Yep. This is just highlighting again the notion that probably among the things that we ask police officers to do, traffic stops are probably the most dangerous. And it's not just from the operator or any of the passengers, it's also from traffic. And again, that policy statement seems to fit in that location. And I don't have any additions or subtractions. I wanted just to see where we were. Does everybody feel fine about that? I do think people need to understand why, an officer might put his hand on the back of a vehicle as they're approaching the rear of a vehicle, and why they stop in particular places. This, I think, is all again from the this is not language which is different from department to department. This actually comes out of the the Justice Council of the state of Vermont. So it seems to me there's another policy statement around DUI enforcement, and I want us to be clear about that. That's Michelle, that's on around page 18.
I'm sorry, I have a question about that statement.
Which statement? The one we were just at?
Yes.
Okay.
Is a statement like this in other similar policies in which there's interaction with the community? So for example, a domestic violence situation?
We have tended to include that kind of language in virtually every policy that we have worked on so far this fall. Yes. The idea is that law enforcement is takes place in a nexus between the police department and its officers and supervisors and the community, so that the community is engaged in that.
It seems like a broad enough statement that would be applicable to not just this section, but the DUI section as well.
So
perhaps maybe.
So you're talking about the language about the utmost care to provide for the continued safety of the community?
That's correct.
That language?
Yes.
Let me propose, not only do we put it in the DUI language, but that we also when you read it again in a few days, you will see that it's up in the front. So that one of the purposes behind, or one of the functions of traffic enforcement is to provide utmost care to the and continued safety of the community. That's one of its goals.
So this is
That
already,
language,
I'm sorry, this is already a very lengthy document. I think that
I
if you're
know.
going to state it one time at the front, then that should be enough.
yeah. Okay, we can take that. I just think it's so important to include that notion of the safety of the community, that it needs to be permeated throughout all of the policies of the Bennington PD, and I think they would too. It's been sort of piecemeal, and that's why we're looking at it this way. So I'll take that under advisement, and we'll figure it out either in the front or in each of the individual ones. I like the idea of it being in the front at the very least. And we can go from there. Any questions about the DUI policy?
I actually think they do a really good job with it. I've been through a number of checkpoints, and every officer is very courteous, and
Yep.
they keep the traffic moving. And and the chief is sometimes present doing the questioning. I think it's hands-on. I think they've done a great job with it. I don't know how many people. I can tell you that a lawyer in town who's now deceased said he wouldn't have quit drinking if he hadn't been pulled over for a DUI. And the thing that struck him is at Project Crash, the first question the facilitator asked was, is this the first time any of you have driven drunk? And everybody said no. And he realized, there, but for the grace of God go I, and the DUI shaped him up.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair statement. The last one has to do with driving while license suspended, and we know that this is, again, for public safety purposes. It is the policy to check all licenses of all persons suspected of violating a motor vehicle law.
I asked a question about that, and I have one follow-up. I'll say them quickly. One is, how do you distinguish between a civil and a criminal driving with license suspended? And the other thing was, how did the department decide to have that one item as a zero tolerance? Well, actually, there's a third one. And the distracted driving is a relatively new evolution in motor vehicle law, and it's not reflected in the policies or procedures.
Oh.
But in any event, just for my own information, how do you distinguish between civil versus criminal driving with license suspended?
So that's through DMV. There's a number of requirements that have to be there for a license to fall under the criminal suspension, and a civil suspension, most common, is just from unpaid tickets or something like that. Your license will just go under suspension. Vermont's kind of unique in that. I know the majority of the other states, you either have a good license or a suspended license, and if you have a suspended license, you're ending up in handcuffs. But Vermont has the two separate civil and then criminal, and all it is different requirements.
Okay. So there's no officer discretion involved. They're either on one track or they're on the other track.
Right, and it's through DMV. When you run a license through the DMV system, DMV will come back and say this license is under criminal suspension or this license is under civil suspension.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it is in the system.
Okay.
I will make a note of the distracted driving question because I think that's an important one, particularly now.
And the third area was they have one policy that's zero tolerance,
Right.
and we don't really have time to talk about it, but are there other areas where the department currently has zero tolerance that aren't identified as zero tolerance, or
yep.
have they lifted? The
I can answer that pretty quickly. The reason that the DUI portion is zero tolerance is by Vermont statute. It is against the law for a police officer to let someone that's DUI just go. We are held by law to arrest suspicion of DUI. We don't have any leniency, any discretion, anything like that by state law.
And isn't there one for zero tolerance for kids who aren't properly restrained?
I believe.
Maybe my memory's failing.
No, I do remember reading that. Not sure if that one's state law or not.
But this is a perfect
remember that.
example where a citation to an actual statute would be helpful, right, Kara? You're muted, but that's okay. I got your nod. No, that's
I
right.
noted that as well, Lon.
Okay.
Yeah,
The
So
zero tolerance in the restrained child section.
and yeah. I
Can
think
I ask a question?
it is in both of those. Yes.
If the zero tolerance policy comes down from the state, what is the point of putting it in this paragraph? It's not the Bennington Police Department zero tolerance, it's the state. So it just seems like unnecessary words.
Here's what I would like to do, because this is going to function now differently than it did when it was just in the police department. It's going to function as a tool of public communication and public education. And I would prefer that we keep it there so that, because you have no idea the number of times I have had somebody come to me, usually a young person, say, well, I was just stopped for DUI and my friend over in Hoosick Falls got off and I didn't. And I want to know why they picked on me. And the answer really is because in New York, there is discretion. In Vermont, under its DUI laws, there isn't any. And that's a perfectly good function of a policy, is to provide that kind of information to the public. Since this is going to have one of its, not its major one, but it's one of its purposes is to provide education to the public when they have that problem. But Robert, it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now gone 15 minutes over. I don't want to be, I'm not tied to the clock. However, I am aware that Officer Ferrara is on he's working for us right now and is getting paid by the town of Bennington. Dan is as well, although salary, so it's not an hourly thing. Are there other, let me ask you this, are there other topics or issues that we need to address right now? Or do you wish to see what this looks like when it comes back to you in, say, early next week? Looking at my calendar, I can get it back to you by early next week, Monday or Tuesday at the latest. I'll give you more time to look at it because this is a more difficult one.
I don't want to look at it now, but I would just suggest if there are other areas of no or very low tolerance that haven't been identified, if that would be a topic of conversation by somebody at a future time. And the other thing is I really appreciate both Dan's participation in this process because, we don't live it every day either as a town administrator or as a police officer. And I know some of my ignorance in particular could be really frustrating to deal with, but I think it's a very valuable process and I appreciate your patience with my many points of view.
I appreciate that. I don't consider it ignorance, by the way. I consider that as an opportunity for me to educate people that like you said, aren't in the know all the time because they don't live it. So
Right.
no worries on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I think I am going to close the meeting for now. And you can expect a couple of things from me. You can expect a new version that hopefully will reflect our conversations. And what I would hope from you is, and I'll say this in the note, and that is that you will be honest about where you think we need to go with this particular policy. Grant you that we're not going to resolve all of the issues, but traffic is one of those places of strong interface between the public and the Bennington PD. And that's why this one is so important that we get it right, that it's helpful both to the PD, but also to the citizens of Bennington. So I think we've made some real progress on it today. And if we need to do something more with it, and you all want to meet or want to do it via email, whichever way you want to do it, I'm sure that the Dans and I will be happy to figure that out. Okay, remembering that it's an open meeting question always, but nonetheless, thank you all for your participation. I appreciate it. It's really, I'm always impressed by the folks who come in and volunteer to do this work. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I'm glad I've gotten to know each of you a little bit more. Thank you, and have a great evening.
Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.